Guys, welcome to my channel. My name is ReadingBear and I hope you are ready for some more stories. And today, we'll take a look at some new entitled people content. If you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comment. And now, let's dive right into the stories.
The first story is titled, Karen Doesn't Like People Parking in Front of Her House. So, when I was around 6 years old, I lived with my family in a nice house in a small city in Poland. It was a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts and pretty much all the neighbors knew each other. There were no sidewalks around the part of the street I lived at. Only one crappy sidewalk that started on the other side in front of my neighbor's house. It's important to remember that the sidewalk was very old and in bad shape. Still to this day people are asking the city to fix it. This story is about that neighbor, Karen. She was an older lady. Everyone suspected that she really didn't have anything better to do than gather gossip and disturb everyone trying to rule the street. Everyone was commenting that if you wanted to get the whole area to know something you had to tell her that message as a secret. Whenever someone came to visit us, they usually parked their car in front of our property. But on bigger meetups, like barbecues or parties, people would park in front of our closest neighbors' houses too. That never was a problem, no gates were obstructed, and no one was disturbed. Well, almost. Karen hated when someone parked in front of her house. She would always run out yelling about how we dared to park our filthy cars on her precious sidewalk. My mother is not someone that lets someone yell at her. She had many discussions with Karen about the laws and rules that stated that she doesn't own anything outside her fence. Which means that the sidewalk is public, and anyone can park on it as long as they leave enough space for a wheelchair to pass. That wasn't enough. Every time someone would come to us and park their car there, the yelling would start. Until one time when my mother's friend, Tomek, came for a coffee during winter. He's a local policeman and his specialty is road law. So, my mother tells him about Karen and her behavior regarding the sidewalk. Tomek laughs since that thing was in such a bad shape that it can barely be even called sidewalk. When he was leaving, he assured my mom that he would step by next day for a coffee on his lunch break. Next day comes by and I was playing with my brother in the snow. We see a black car pulling over in front of Karen's house and, as the driver gets out, Karen storms out of her house yelling, "Karen! You can't park here. This is my sidewalk. Get your filthy car off my property." Well, there he was, Tomek, with his full uniform, hat and all, turning around towards Karen as comically as he could. Tomek. Excuse me? You tell me that I can't park my car here? Karen. Yes, Tomek. But this is a sidewalk open to the public. Karen. Yes, this is my sidewalk. Tomek. So, let me get this right. This is your sidewalk? Karen. Yes, Tomek. And you are the one responsible for taking care of it? Karen. Proudly. Well, yes I am. That's why I don't allow anyone to park here. Tomek. Oh, that's so nice that I found you. Since it's your sidewalk, you are responsible for clearing the snow from it to not create danger for the people walking on it. Since it was not plowed, I need to write you a fine for endangering public safety, he says as he pulls out his note block. Karen. But no other sidewalks are plowed. Tomek. Oh, it doesn't matter, the other sidewalks belong to the city. The clearing crew is working on cleaning them. But since this sidewalk is yours, it's your responsibility. Karen. But I'm old, I can't shovel the snow. Tomek. Then you need to hire someone to do that. Of course, if this sidewalk happened to be of public property. Karen. Yes, it's not mine. Tomek. But a moment ago you were yelling at me that it was. So, what is it? Is it yours or not? Because I don't know if I should fine you now. Karen. No, it's not mine. Alright, seems like we cleared that up. Now, if you ever harass anyone like you did with me, it could result in a fine. So, I recommend you watching out on what you claim to be yours. And then he proceeded to cross the street and enjoy a coffee in our house. Karen never disturbed anyone for parking in front of her house again. She would only stare at people trying to burn holes in their skulls with her sight. The next story is entitled Aunt Achieves Ultra Greed Status and Attempts to Steal Vehicles Willed to Nephew. Little backstory. My aunt has always had a greedy streak ever since I was a kid. She is the type of person that will yell at a store employee because something that was advertised isn't in stock or not at that particular store or not on sale and has been banned from entering multiple stores. When my grandmother was on her deathbed, my aunt had talked her way into getting my grandmother to sign her on as an executor of the will and ended up taking everything and anything that had the most value. Fast forward. My uncle was my best friend. I always looked up to him as a kid. He was a truck driver, so he would be gone for a long time. I remember one summer he even took me with him on the road, but sadly my uncle had cancer, and while he was in the hospital my aunt had tried to get him to assign her as an executor of his will, but since he was quick to pick up on what happened when my grandmother passed away, he hired a professional estate lawyer that would take care of everything. If you can imagine, my aunt was not very happy and was quick to throw out a sob story of how offended she was that her brother couldn't entrust her with an important task. This went on for 2 weeks. Even on his last day in hospice, she still brought it up, and was asked to leave by nurses. He passed away peacefully in 2011. Now I didn't know it at the time, but I quickly found out why my aunt was, so we were all asked to gather at my mom's home where the estate lawyer came to tell us who was getting what. Finally, my time came on the list and I was surprised to have anything willed to me. What did my uncle will to me? Why, his rig and car, of course. My uncle's rig is a 2008 Lone Star International which was fully loaded. My uncle's car is a 1966 Chevelle SS. My first thought was, what in the hell am I going to do with a big rig? My aunt's first thought. Well, she didn't have a first thought, she just screamed and cussed at the lawyer, saying that I was too sick to have those things and didn't deserve them because I was his nephew and not his sister. The lawyer asked her to sit down, and he would get to her. When my aunt sat down, she looked at me and said, "You're giving me the title to both of those," to which I laughed and said, "In your dreams maybe." The lawyer kept going down the list, and because my uncle was a legend, he put my aunt at the bottom of the list and said, to quote, "To my sister I am leaving her my luckiest, most important dollar, because all present at this meeting will know she needs it most," and then was handed the dirtiest looking Canadian $1 coin which was sealed in a block of acrylic. Myself, my dad and my other uncles nearly wet ourselves laughing. My aunt, however, didn't find it that funny and instead went into another tirade on how this was unfair and saying she didn't have anything to hold on that was his. The day passed and then the nightmare began. My aunt would call over and over and over asking about the truck, wanting to buy the car, if I was going to sell the truck, if I was going to sell the car, all to which I said no. Things got worse when my aunt started saying that she wanted her car and she had someone that wanted to buy our truck. At this point I got extremely irritated and said, "It's not your car, it's my car, and my car is staying with me, and it's not our truck, it's my truck, and no one is buying it." A week later I woke up and heard something, so I went to investigate, and there was a tow truck in the driveway. I quickly told the tow truck driver, who was a friend of my aunt, that if he so much as put a hand on that Chevelle I would have him arrested for trespassing and grand theft, and then proceeded to call the police. Cops showed up and I told the police officer my side of the story. Then he went to my aunt and the conversation went like this. Cop: "Ma'am, can you tell me, is this your car?" Aunt: "Yes, it is. He just won't give it to me." Cop: "Ma'am, do you have the title of the vehicle?" Aunt: "No, I do not, he won't give that to me." Cop: "Well, ma'am, I looked at the registration and title of the vehicle and he is listed as the owner of the vehicle. That vehicle is legally not yours, and having it towed could land you and your friend prison time for auto theft." Aunt: "Well, I think I am the one who should get the car because he can't even take care of himself." Cop: "Ma'am, it doesn't matter what you think. What matters is legal ownership, which you do not have." A week later my aunt had attempted to take me to court for the car, which the case wasn't even put before a judge. My aunt refiled the claim again. It went to court, and once I provided a copy of the will, title and registration, the judgment went in my favor and my aunt was forced to pay my court costs after dismissing my aunt's claims with prejudice, meaning she can never file that lawsuit again. Then tragedy struck again. This time a great uncle passed away. I was on the will. Again. Can you guess what was left to me? A new car. My great uncle's 1967 Chevrolet Impala SS, which he restored himself. My great aunt, his widow, was thrilled that I got it, but the mood was quickly soured when she realized that my entitled aunt, her niece, really was not thrilled that I got it. This time she stepped it up a notch and skipped the screaming and complaining and instead went to scheming. 3 days after I took possession of the Impala, she rented not just one flatbed, but 2 flatbeds. She managed to get the Impala onto the flatbed and sped off, leaving her boyfriend behind, attempting to get the Chevelle on his flatbed as quickly as he could while I stood by on the phone with police. Police quickly caught up with my aunt and arrested. Her boyfriend was arrested in my driveway and soiled himself in the process. Her and her boyfriend both were hit for 2 counts of motor vehicle theft. Both were charged and found guilty and sentenced to 2 years and 2 days in jail. End points. I haven't spoken to or heard from my aunt since she got out of prison, and I have no desire to. Before she was released from jail, I filed a restraining order against her and it has stood since then, but the last I heard, she is still screaming at store employees, complaining about money and asking about me and the vehicles. I still am the owner of all 3 vehicles, the Chevelle, the Impala and the Lone Star International, and don't plan on selling any of them. I repair and build computers for a living, but more and more I have been getting into auto repair as a hobby. As I do live in Canada, I do not drive the Impala or Chevelle during winter months. But every year I always take my great aunt, who is now 96 years old, to A&W to get a burger, onion rings and an ice-cold root beer in the Impala, which is something my great-uncle did for her since he got the Impala in 1970. A very good friend of my uncle's who now owns a business actually rents the Lone Star International from me. He promised me that he would not get a single scratch or spot of rust on any single part of it, and to this day that Lone Star looks factory new and has been all over the world. The guy that rents the truck even continued doing a little tradition my uncle did, which was to get a decal on the truck of the state, province, territory flag of the places the truck has visited. It currently has 31 state decals and 3 province decals on it. My great aunt isn't in great health, and she has told me that she put me in her will so that I will get her cars, because she knows that I will take care of it and park it right beside the '67 Impala SS. 2 of my great uncle's first cars, originally left to her in the will, are a 1958 Chevrolet Impala and 1957 Plymouth Belvedere Fury, which is my favorite car. I saw the movie Christine when I was 6 years old in 1996. Ever since I loved the car. I can already imagine the fallout that I'm going to get for that, so there may even be another post, though I really do hope there is not. The next story is entitled Neighbor Expected His Utility Bill to Be Paid. This was late 1990s in rural South Carolina, rather important context. My relative, Natalie, is an out lesbian. Indeed, she and her partner, Sherry, were in discussion to be the plaintiffs in a legal case seeking to overturn bans on same-sex marriage. Sherry got a job as a high-powered engineer for a major international company and moved to South Carolina. Wanting to live in a more rural area, Sherry and Natalie found a home that was a converted barn sitting on about 8 acres, complete with pool, private lake, small fruit orchard, and some open fields. As the property had some electrical drops in various parts of the property, the sellers let Sherry know there are actually 3 electric meters for the property, each billed separately. The main house was on one. There was a hookup on a light pole in the orchard. And there was one more for a well on the property. Go figure. The 2 meters that were not the main house were cheap, so Sherry and Natalie didn't give it much thought. After they were living there a few months, Natalie mentioned that the electric bill for the well pump went way up. Nothing outrageous, but from like $6 per month to nearly $40. Curious, I did some back-of-the-napkin calculations and found that the 1/4 of a horsepower pump would have needed to run 24/7 for about 25 straight days to use that much electricity. It was just the 2 of them living there, and there was no way they could have used that much water. Something wasn't right. And so I began a bit of investigation, looking for a leak. I followed the water line out of the house, and oddly it ran off away from the well out in the field. I followed the line back into the edge of the woods behind the barn and found, much to everyone's surprise, another well with its own pump powered from the main house. So, what the hell was this other pump in the field for? And so I started digging. Surprisingly, that well ran to the neighbor's house. And that is when we finally got the full story. The neighbor was the pastor at the church where the former homeowners attended. They had an arrangement that the former homeowner let the pastor get his water from well on the farm property, and the former homeowner just paid the bill. But somehow there had been an electrical fault to ground, IIRC. I don't really understand electrical stuff much, and the meter was spinning almost non-stop. That is why the bill spiked. So, Sherry, not wanting to rock the boat, offered the pastor continued use of the well if he would fix the electrical issue and get the meter into his name. But he refused. He insisted that he had a right to free well water, at Sherry's expense, and got rather unpleasant about it. This was what God wanted, and similar proclamations were hurled Sherry's way. Fine. Her well. Her pump. Sherry gave him a couple weeks' notice and disconnected the electrical meter. No pump, no water, no longer her problem. Rather than agreeing to reimburse Sherry maybe $80 in excess bills over a couple months, paying to get the pump fixed, and taking over the rather modest bill, we saw a well drilling rig at the pastor's house a few days later. Must have been thousands of dollars. To cap it off, Natalie talked Sherry into doing something else with that well. They did fix the pump, run a new water line, and built a bathroom with showers, all for their new women-only, lesbian campground. The campground didn't last particularly long as a business. It mostly just covered some basic expenses for a few large events each summer. But if not for the pastor's obstinance, it might never have existed at all. The next story is titled, Neighbor Steals Newspaper, Gets Caught in the Act. So, this isn't my story but a story of my parents when I was about 3 or so. Okay, so some background here. Back then we lived in an apartment complex where there would be a door between the elevator door and the doors to the respective households on the floor. So basically, when you look out the door, the neighbor's front door is several feet from you. Both of my parents love reading the newspaper, and it was back when everyone preferred paper newspapers over electronic news. My dad had a schedule, and he would read the paper on the subway on the way to work. But one day, the daily newspaper wasn't at our door. At first Dad thought that the paper agency had messed up and didn't care. However, he began to suspect that our neighbors were stealing the paper. This was because every day the neighbor's door would open really early right after the paper delivery time. So, he came up with an ingenious idea. He woke up really early before the paper arrived. When the paper finally did come, he had my mom sew a piece of string onto the paper and flipped it on its back so the string wouldn't show. He pulled the string under the door and waited. Then, right when he was about to give up, the string moved back out from the door. Dad leapt to his feet, opened the door and caught our neighbor stealing the paper in the act. Her excuse was that since Dad worked for a large news agency, we would have all the news we wanted, and that she deserved the paper more than we did. We called the police and had her arrested for theft. She had to pay a hefty $200 fine in the end. The last story is entitled Neighbors Demand We Move Our Fence. I moved into a new house around September of 2018 with my family. We wanted a big place, so we got one with a big open concept and a fairly sized backyard. Now onto the story. About a week after moving in, I introduced myself to the neighbors. When I introduced myself to my entitled neighbors, they seemed nice at first. Then the next day the couple came out screaming as we were moving in the playset for my kids, demanding that we move our fence. I responded saying no, but they just kept screaming about it and said we were 10 feet in their property. I did not buy it. I knew what they were doing, trying to scam me out of my property. The next day my son came in crying, saying he was climbing the tree and fell on the fence and landed in the entitled neighbor's yard. He said they just started screaming at him saying he was stupid. I am very protective of my kids, so I went out and got mad at them and they said, "That is what you get for not moving your fence." The next day I hired a contractor to come to take a look at the property line. Guess what? Not only was the line fine, they were around 10 feet on our property. So, when we got a new fence because the old one was rotting, we moved ours to where it should be, but they were losing it at us, and when we showed them the paperwork, we got them to shut up. We got the new fence in, but one of their sprinklers was on our side. I did not care, but I did leave a few inches between us and our neighbors. Thanks for listening.